This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The Wolverines teach Florida an age-old lesson. Shut your hole and know your role. Next on Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper in the corner. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and in. Touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And the leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number. And he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown from Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Michigan Podcast. And of course, it's a victorious one that we are very happy about. My name is Steve Deace. A lot of coverage this week of Michigan's huge win over the Florida Gators. Michael Spath of the Michigan Insider and WTKA Ann Arbor is going to join us later in this hour. We'll have our first look at my weekly Big Ten Power Ratings. If I had a vote in the AP poll, what would my top 25 look like? And more here to come on Michigan Podcast. But first, remember to like us here on this video on YouTube. Subscribe as well. Share it with everybody you know, every Michigan fan you know. So many of you tell us, man, we love what you're doing. If only more people knew about it. Well, you can help more people to know about it. Help us by spreading the word about what we're doing here on Michigan Podcast. Also, if you're worried about data limits or if you want to listen in your car, yes, you can subscribe via Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, all of those platforms. And our good friends at Detroit Sports Podcast help us to get the word out about those audio formats as well. Those are available to you too. So make sure you subscribe to those. And then finally, a lot of you ask us as well, hey, what can we do to support what you guys are doing? Well, we do have a Patreon page. If you like what we're doing, you just give us $1 a month just as a way of saying, hey, thank you for making my ride to work a couple days a week, or my workout a couple days a week go by faster. Or if you want to support us to $5 a month, we give you exclusive access to our instant reaction podcast that I literally do from my maize and blue basement man cave at my house after every Michigan game, as well as my weekly point spread picks, including my official Michigan prediction, which I did get right this week, picking Michigan to cover the 5-point spread against Florida. They covered that and then some. So go to Patreon Michigan Podcast. Look us up there too if you'd like to support us. Well, let's begin with an age-old lesson the Wolverines taught the Florida Gators on Saturday. Shut your hole and know your role. Seemed really unlike a program of the magnitude of Florida. It could be argued over the last really 25 years since Steve Spurrier resurrected the program in the early 90s that they've been the equal, maybe, and in some ways even, I hate to say this, superior to Michigan's program over that course of time. So to see them talk so much junk, freshman running backs talking about we're going to beat the brakes off of Michigan. Hey, bro, Why don't you get through summer conditioning first, okay? Mister, I had 5 carries for 13 yards after running all that smack. And it wasn't even just the players. How about Jordan Scarlett, by the way? Michigan can't run sideline to sideline. Well, you know what they can do, though, is apparently they can run back and forth to the game and practice without getting suspended, Jordan. I think you hear me knocking and I'm coming in because your ass wasn't there on Saturday. Maybe you need to worry about your own house there, brother. But, hey, how about even the coach, Mr. McElwain? Now, listen, I understand your coach is a badass down there in Gainesville. You've heard of jumping the shark. Well, this is the man that spoons them without fear, allegedly, right? So even McElwain saying, hey, we're going to beat the heck out of Michigan. Talking about Harbaugh, Michigan wasn't relevant. And so Harbaugh had to do chicanery and acts of craziness to get them back on the map. I watched SEC Nation on Saturday because I'm the kind of guy that likes to know what the other side thinks, So I watched SEC Nation's game day program on Saturday, and even McElwain was on there talking junk. He looked right at Tim Tebow and said, hey, Tim, we've got speed guys at receiver. We're not going to miss Antonio Callaway and those guys. We've got speed guys at receiver like we had back when you played, okay? They ran their mouths for weeks, if not months. And then, when they kicked it high and we played the game, they got their mouths bloodied by the Wolverines. So, hey, this game was a lot closer to 40-0 than it was winnable for Florida. Keep in mind, both the Florida scores were pick sixes. Even their field goal, if Devin Bush doesn't get a personal foul in the first drive of the game, Florida doesn't get that field goal. They have to punt in that situation, another 15 yards back. So this was a lot closer to one of the most embarrassing moments in recent SEC history than it was Florida actually winning it. It's not often you have a blocked punt and 2 pick sixes in a quarter, and you're only down by 4 points. Okay? These guys did not belong on the same field as the Wolverines. Over half of Florida's quarterback drops resulted in quarterback pressures in the game, 53%. This was a physical mauling, a physical manhandling by a team that was bigger, stronger, and yes, dare I say it, faster than that vaunted SEC speed. That's why don't talk smack. Don't write checks with your mouth that your body can't cash. Actually, wait until the game is played and let the scoreboard do the talking for you, because there's no argument that scoreboard doesn't win. So let's look back on this momentous event on Saturday. Now, I got to warn you. What you're about to see is some plodding, meandering, slow-footed, thick-ankled, cankled even football players, the likes of which you're not accustomed to seeing. But enough about the Florida Gators. Here's your Michigan Wolverines.
Game has a lot of unknowns, but it seems like this one has more than normal. And the closer we've gotten to this game, the more intriguing the matchup has grown. And I think on a scale of 1 to 10, this game is right up at a 10 now.
Play as hard as you can, as fast as you can, as long as you can. Win on 3, 1, 2, 3, 1.
This is a very aggressive Michigan defense.
Feast your eyes, I got something new.
Is wrestled down by Devin Bush.
From up here, can't beat you.
Touchdown, Michigan.
Just watch me now. Just watch me now. You won't believe your eyes. Just watch me now. Just watch me now.
It's a perfect one-side strip for the TD, 7 points. It's lovely.
Just watch me now. Just watch me now. Just watch me now.
All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, and this portion of the program is brought to you by our good friends at Sport Court. I mean, look at that maize and blue court with the jump man. I mean, that is absolutely phenomenal. So if you are looking to put the ball in your court, your actual court, Sport Court of Michigan has you covered. Yes, Sparty fans, they'll even slum it for you guys too. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, give them a call, based out of Michigan and ready to install your court sooner than you expect. Now, if you're in the southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Visit sportcourtmi.com, sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you're outside of southeast Michigan and you need a hoop for your driveway or yard, they've got you covered as well. Go to monsterhoops.com, anywhere in the country, monsterhoops.com, and they will ship it right to your door. Mention the Michigan Podcast, and you can save $100 at monsterhoop.com. Also, if you mention Michigan Podcast, you can save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court at sportcourtmi.com, depending on the package you select. So again, sportcourtmi.com. If you're local in Michigan, mention Michigan Podcast. You'll save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court. You can save up to $100 anywhere in the country if you mention Michigan Podcast at monsterhoops.com. Either way, tell them Michigan Podcast sent you. Joined now on Michigan Podcast by Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. And Michael, obviously these conversations are a lot more fun after an effort like we saw on Saturday. How are you?
I'm doing great, man, and that was a lot of fun. I tell you what, everybody I've talked to, my brother, my friends, people on the radio, I think we're all in agreement that it was a 33-17 victory, but it was more like a 49-3 type of win. And to come out that way after 8 months where you're just waiting and waiting for college football, oh, man, that was about as good as it can be for the first game. And yet there's still so much to talk about, still so much to improve upon, that you wonder how much better this team can be.
You know, you're right about that. In fact, you know, people keep pointing out the 2 pick sixes, but they forget without Devin Bush's personal foul on that first drive, they're not in field goal range. I mean, this was a lot closer to a 40-0, not even counting the points Michigan left on the field and the touchdown the refs erroneously took away. This was darn near close to arguably the most embarrassing moment for the SEC in the conference's modern history. It was that close, Michael, to being a legendary beatdown of an SEC team.
Well, I do think someone in the SEC has lost to a FCS team before, so I don't know if it would be the most embarrassing moment in SEC, non-conference history, but certainly I think when you take a program like Florida that came into the year projected to be the top team in the SEC East, and you have a team in Michigan that, let's face it, I think, and you probably think this too, that they've been underrated coming into this non-conference season. But I think what you had is you have the third best team in the Big Ten by the rankings, and you had maybe the best team in the SEC East. I mean, yeah, if Michigan would have gone out there and beaten them like they could have in this game, 49-3, you would have had a lot more people talking about just how good the Big Ten is, just how impressive Michigan is. I think that's the one thing that disappoints me a little bit is, at least nationally, yeah, there's a lot of talk about the defense, but when the rankings come out, and I hadn't seen them yet by the time we were talking here today, I don't think Michigan's going to have moved up a lot very much. But I think at the same time, I think they're probably one of the 5 best teams in the country right now.
Well, they moved up to number 8 in the AP poll. Florida remains in the AP poll, which means Michigan has a rare win over a team in the top 25, and yet somehow they're only ranked 8th. Can you explain that? I mean, not that it really matters this early in the year, and really these are largely for fun and conjecture. And frankly, with such a young team, I kind of like the idea of keeping them hungry and keeping them feeling disrespected. But the logic of saying Florida still deserves to be in the top 25, but Michigan only moves up a couple of spots for beating him so badly, that just doesn't make much sense to me.
I think what happened, Steve, and I was a little annoyed by this because I saw some power rankings that came out earlier in the week, and they still had they looked at the AP preseason poll or the coaches poll, and they were like, okay, let's take one guy off the list, Florida State. Let's move Michigan up 1 or 2. But that poll was a preseason prediction, and that poll should not be used as a pecking order for where teams are. Really what you should be doing when you come up with these polls is every week you should be saying to yourself, okay, who are the top 25 teams in the country? Let's start with number 1. Number 1's Alabama. Nobody's arguing that. Okay, who's the second best team in the country based off of what I saw in week 1? You can make the argument for Clemson. You can make the argument for maybe Oklahoma. Okay, so those guys are 2, 3. Then where do we go after that? Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, I would have somewhere in that 4, 5, 6 range. And out of those 3 teams, who had the most impressive victory? I think Michigan did. And so I honestly, if I was putting this together, I mean, I think when I did this, I had Michigan 5th. But I think you have to look at it that way. And unfortunately, that's not how pollsters do it. What pollsters do is they literally just, okay, this is what it was the week before. Let's move somebody up. Let's move somebody down based off of wins and losses. And that's not really getting an accurate assessment of who the top 25 teams in the country are. The good news is that the College Football Playoff Committee, come mid-October, that's exactly how they do it. Yep. They look at who are the best teams and not who is ranked where and how to move them up.
I mean, I even saw Jerry Palm, and by the way, I'm going to have if I voted in the AP poll later on in this episode, and I will have Michigan higher than 8th, by the way, but I even saw Jerry Palm at CBS Sports. You know, when I did local sports talk radio, and he had collegebcs.com and collegerpi.com before he went big time, I used to have him on all the time. Smart guy, knows his stuff, Purdue grad, Big Ten guy. He's got his latest bowl projections out, and he has Florida in a New Year's Six bowl and Michigan in the Holiday Bowl. And then he gives us like paragraph explanation that defies all logic because, first of all, the College Football Playoff Committee is who determines all of those New Year's Six bowls. There's just no way if it came down to that, because we don't have the old BCS rules that you can't only have 2 teams from one conference. Last year, the Big Ten got 4 teams in those bowl games. So there's no way if this came down and it was relatively even, the committee's going to say Michigan goes to the second tier of Big Ten bowls while Florida goes to a New Year's Six bowl game. I mean, some of these people, I just think, Mike, they just don't like to admit they were wrong about something, and they just come up with dumb, convoluted reasoning that they're smarter than in order to stick with a narrative that they thought was true for 6 months.
Well, essentially, to put Michigan in the Holiday Bowl and Florida in one of the New Year's Day 6, they're saying that Michigan's probably going to lose its next 3 tough games. And that they will finish 3rd in the Big Ten East, and that they don't deserve to go to a better game. And I guess they're predicting Florida to go like 10-1 the rest of the year and play in the SEC championship game. And I mean, from what I can tell, you know, and I think this is the disappointing part for me as a person that covers Michigan, as a bit of a Michigan fan, is I don't think Florida is going to end up having a very good season. And I think what's going to end up happening down the road is you're going to have people discounting the Michigan win because they're going to say, well, Florida's an 8-4 team or Florida's a 7-5 team. But when they start the season, they're not an 8-4 team. When they start the season, they're playing with confidence. They're playing with some swagger. They've got some hype. They've got some excitement. And so I don't think you can take Michigan's victory away from them beating Florida. But yeah, that's to have Jerry Palm say that, and I agree with you. He's a smart guy. It's going to be, if you're Jim Harbaugh, you've got to go out to your team and you say, look, you've got to every single week. You need to earn it. You need to make them take notice of you. And if you keep winning football games, if you go up to State College in mid-October and you beat Penn State, and you go to Wisconsin and you beat Wisconsin, and you know what? You come home and you beat Ohio State, then no one's going to take anything away from you. And that's really what it has to come down to, because this Michigan team's not getting the benefit of the doubt. They're not Ohio State territory yet. They're not Alabama territory yet. They're not Clemson territory yet. And so they got to go out there and get it every single weekend. And the good thing is that nobody knows that better than Jim Harbaugh.
Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider is our guest on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. 2 stats that came out of this weekend I want to get your reaction to, Michael. I'll start with number 1. Michigan now is the 5th team since 2005 to hold the Florida Gators to less than 10 first downs in a game. The 4 previous teams that did it all made it to the national championship game. Your thoughts on that trend?
Well, are all 4 of those teams Alabama?
Florida State might have been one of those teams. Yeah, Florida State and Alabama, I think, were the 4 teams that previously did that.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama did it probably to them twice in the SEC championship games the past 2 years. You know, that's a eye-opening stat. I don't know that it has I don't know that it portends to like, well, Michigan's going to go to the national championship game because they shut down this Florida team. Just because there's so many things, there's so many stats you can look at in college football without jumping to that particular conclusion. Certainly it bodes well for this Michigan team. And what it bodes really well for is what we saw out of Michigan on Saturday was exceptional defensive play, extremely fast to the football. So many guys, whether it's Rashawn Gary or Maurice Hurst, Chase Winovich, Devin Bush, Khaleke Hudson, Tyreek. I mean, we can just keep on going down and down the list that made big plays in this game on Saturday. And I think everybody, as much excitement as there was in the offseason, I think everybody had a little bit of, okay, what is this defense really going to be? Mm-hmm. How good are they really going to be? And that question was pretty much answered in the first game. And so now you're looking at, all right, if this defense can play like this consistently, what it's going to come down to is those 3 big games, plus maybe, Indiana on the road, who's shown you a little bit in the first week. Maryland just lost their starting quarterback, but they could be a tough out later in the year. But the defense should probably put Michigan in position to win every game the rest of the way. And then it comes down to what the offense can do. But I like the stats, Steve. I love stats. I don't know necessarily that means that Michigan's going to play the national championship because they did what 4 other teams did. You're going to love this stat. In the history of the SEC and the Big Ten, Saturday was the first time that in a non-conference matchup where they're both ranked, a Big Ten team actually beat an SEC team. That stat is from the BTN last year. I didn't think it was right because I remember Wisconsin beating LSU last year when they were 5th in the country. I went back and looked it up. Wisconsin was not ranked in the preseason AP poll last year. So there's been... And this doesn't include bowl games? This is just non-conference regular season games. Now, there's only been 8 of these because I think Alabama and Penn State played a home-and-home a few years ago after Penn State joined the Big Ten. Alabama and Penn State used to play a lot when we were kids, when Penn State was independent. But the SEC schools won't play us home and home, right? So there's only been 8 of these non-conference matchups ever where they're both where both the SEC and Big Ten team are both ranked, and this is the first time that a Big Ten team won one of those games. Your reaction to that? I love that. I mean, I got to be honest. I mean, the fact that Michigan is 4-0 against Florida. I mean, this was the team of the 1990s, right? This is one of the best programs. The 1990s and most of the 2000s with Urban Meyer there and Tim Tebow. And, anytime the argument comes up between now and the rest of your life, but really the next couple of months, when someone says SEC speed and talks about the Big Ten, all you have to do if you're Michigan is point to these matchups with Florida. Because starting in that 2002 season in the bowl game, every single time Michigan's played them, they've played them in a neutral site, and Florida was supposed to be the better team, and Michigan went out there and beat them and beat them and beat them. Spanked them the last 2 times. Michigan is 16-10 all time against the SEC. They've beaten Auburn. They've beaten Alabama. They've beaten Ole Miss. They've beaten Georgia. They've beaten everybody that is supposedly the best of the best in the SEC. So I absolutely love that stat, and I'll be certain to use that going forward, Steve. I appreciate you giving me that one. You don't even have to give me credit for that. I stole it from the Big Ten Network, so there you go. Let's talk about the offense. The defense, I think, lived up to all the hype of what we had seen and heard in the offseason, and I remember posting at Michigan Insider after the spring. I didn't know how many games the team would win, but that did not physically look like a team that lost 17 guys to the NFL. I mean, those guys, we are recruiting and developing guys at a different level than even we did when we were great in the Carr years, where we even, guys had to take 2 or 3 years to cycle up, to get ready to play at this level. I could not believe how big some of these redshirt freshmen and sophomore guys were. And you saw this on Saturday, and they had the movement to go along with it. But it's not all wine and roses coming out of this game. Offensively, the overall stat line looks good. Well over 400 yards, 200 yards when you count the O'Korn pass to Black. We had 200 yards passing and rushing. So that's kind of your NFL style of offense, your goal. If you can do that at the collegiate level, that's what you're looking for. They did accomplish that. They averaged nearly 5 yards a rush. Even at the end of the first half, when they were kind of teetering there in the second quarter, deep in their own territory, they were able to run the clock out so they'd have to put
put a punt unit that had just had a punt blocked back on the field. So some things there that you like. Ty Isaac got over 100 yards. But then there's the play of Wilton Speight. I know yesterday you spent some time on Sunday, actually, charting all of his throws. And I listened to some of your analysis this morning and the previous morning on WTKA. Do I have it right in that you think that his performance was not as bad as people are letting on, but it's also not as good as it needed to be?
I think that's pretty fair, honestly. I think when you look at Wilton Speight, I've said this repeatedly throughout the offseason because I've been someone that has defended Wilton Speight consistently. And what I keep saying is that for Michigan to win a championship, for Michigan to beat Ohio State, for Michigan to win on the road at Penn State, Wilton Speight, as a second-year starter, as a third-year player under Jim Harbaugh, has to be a positive difference maker for the Wolverines. And on Saturday, was he that? I would say probably not. I think they won that game because of a couple big plays. Yes, he had the touchdown pass, and he threw the one to Nick Eubanks. I always want to say Kevin Eubanks, the former Tonight Show band.
I keep calling him Raphael Eubanks for some reason. I don't know if that's a pro athlete in another sport or not. I don't know.
I'll get it right one of these days. Nick Eubanks. He threw a couple good balls, and he moved the chains a couple of times. But no, he's got to play better than he did against Florida in that game, because to beat Penn State on the road, to beat Wisconsin on the road, and to come back and beat Ohio State, which they struggled a little bit with Indiana, but let's face it, by week 12 they're going to be a juggernaut. He has got to be. I'm not saying Josh Rosen fourth quarter against Texas A&M, but he's got to be someone that probably throws 2 or 3 touchdown passes, eliminates the bad turnovers. There might be an interception here or there, but he's got to eliminate the really bad turnovers that are costing Michigan critical moments against Ohio State and against Florida. At the same time in this past game, there's been so much overreaction to those 2 interceptions. The second one, not a good throw. He will readily admit that. I'm a big believer that the first interception, pick 6, was not on Wilton Speight, but was on Kekoa Crawford, the young wide receiver. I think Wilton Speight threw the ball in a position where he's leading his wide receiver out in front of him. Yes, that's a little bit high, but the guy's 6'1.5", 6'2". I mean, that's a ball that that should be right there. And Kekoa Crawford got his head turned around, got his hands out there. He leapt a little bit off the ground, but that's a play that if you're wearing the number 1 jersey especially, you've got to make that play. I'm sorry, but there's no excuses for that. The overthrow later in the game against Kekoa Crawford, that honestly might be his worst throw of the entire day, because that's a chance to salt them away. And that's what I'm talking about. If you're Wilton Speight, you've got to make that throw again to Kekoa Crawford late in the game, because that's a moment right there where you're up 26-17. You have a chance to finish this team off and be a positive difference maker for your team, and instead you overthrow them. That just can't happen. It can't happen against Penn State. He needs to be – I'll say this when it comes down to me, Steve, is that when they play Penn State on the road, Wisconsin on the road, and Ohio State at home, he has to be the best quarterback on the field those 3 games. If he is, then he's going to be everything that I think he can be. He'll be a championship quarterback, and Michigan will be playing in Indianapolis. If he's not the best quarterback in those 3 games, then sorry, but that's not good enough. And next year you'll go into 2018 knowing it can't be Wilton Speight.
The thing with Speight, the Navarre comparisons have been there from day one because, frankly, they're both tall and white. Beyond that, though, their games are totally different. He's a lot more athletic than John Navarre. I think Navarre had to be coached into toughness. I think Speight from day one, and I think this is what Harbaugh loves about him, he's a son of a gun. He's full of urine and vinegar, if you know what I'm saying. He has that moxie, and the mechanics may not always be there. I mean, even coming out after the game and admitting that Pep Hamilton and Harbaugh came up to him at halftime and said, "Hey, what you do in this first drive of the third quarter will be crucial for you." In other words, this is probably the end of your leash, and for him to come right out and lead the team right down the field for a touchdown, that's the moxie that you're looking for. Where I do see some of the Navarre comparisons, though, when the mechanics break down, particularly in games they're not playing at home. I used to joke back in the day when we put on the white jerseys, John Navarre would become John Bizarre. I mean, the accuracy would drop by 10 points just by the sheer putting on of a white uniform, it seemed. And that's where I think the next threshold for him is that consistency level. And I think that's why you do see fans kind of treat him the way they did John Navarre pretty much until he won that 100th game against Ohio State his senior year, Michael.
I think there's a couple of things that I want to say, and one of them I thought was great from Jim Harbaugh at his Monday coaches show at the Pizza House. And one of the things that he said is that Wilton Speight is so aware, even though he's done a good job locking himself down, he doesn't read a lot of social media, but he's so aware that Michigan football fans especially, and some pundits and some critics and some media types are really hard on him. And so he thinks that in every single throw that he makes, he's got to hit the big one. And when you have that type of mindset, you can be too amped up. Mm-hmm. You can be trying to thread too many tight windows. You might take the shot to Grant Perry out in the, out on an out pattern where neither one of those guys is open, but somebody underneath might be open. So he's got to, and that's a big thing for me with Wilton Speight, is that when you're in your third year with Harbaugh, you're in your second year as a starter, that's the big change you got to make, is that you got to settle down, because you're a leader and then everybody follows, and you've got to start making the smart play and not the sexy play and not the home run all the time. The one thing I would say is his team truly believes in this guy.
You can see that. Yeah.
And so when you're talking about, is there a short leash? What do you do if he struggles a little bit more? I don't know what the answer is because of two things. One, John O'Korn went in there for 2 series on Saturday against Florida, and this was his opportunity. And his first go-around, they ran the ball 3 times. I don't know if it was a broken play or what happened on the third play, but it didn't look very good. He goes in there the second series. He has a nice pass to Tariq Black down the sideline, but then he kind of goes in that shell that we saw against Indiana last year where he panics in the pocket. Mm-hmm. He had guys open. He just kind of ran right into the sack. And so clearly he is pretty far behind, I would say, Wilton Speight in terms of his pocket presence, as you mentioned, Steve, and his ability to navigate the pocket and understand where he needs to go with the ball. So I think John O'Korn is further down at number 2 than to make it a really close battle. Brandon Peters is not ready to be the guy, everything we've heard. And his team rallies around Wilton Speight. So this is something that I've been saying on the radio for the past couple of days this week, is that if you are a Wilton Speight hater, I got bad news for you, because he ain't going anywhere. And if it's almost like time to just listen. You want to be critical, you want to be upset, I get it, but at least like publicly, at least like when you go to the games, you should have this kid's back, because he is your quarterback, and he's your quarterback not only for week 2, but I certainly think that he's going to be your quarterback all year long unless he gets injured.
2 more questions from Michael Spath from Michigan Insider, WTKA Ann Arbor. Here's my biggest complaint. And I say this, I love Jimmy. He was my favorite player as a kid. When they used to give us the NCAA football game, whenever I used to create myself, I always gave myself number 4. But I love my wife even more than I love Jimmy, and I don't agree with her all the time either, Michael. Okay, so here's my lament. The rut we get into, and I think we saw this last year in games we lost especially, this run-pass routine, running on first down over and over and over again. I bet if we went back and charted Florida's linebackers, how close they kept approaching the line of scrimmage, knowing a run was coming on first down. In the third quarter to open up the game, when we need to swing the momentum back, we get the first possession of the second half. If you go look at that drive, the very first down was a play-action pass. Then the first down we got ensuing that one was another play action pass. You back their linebackers even another half a yard or so off the line of scrimmage. That opens up more running lanes, and and other than the Grant Perry pass, we ran the ball down their throat that opening drive, scored a touchdown. We then got away from throwing the ball on first down after that the rest of the game. And this is something that I saw at the end of last year. We've got to get out of this run on first down rut. And I think that we just aren't quite yet physical enough at the line of scrimmage. Plus, the way college teams play defense nowadays anyway, most defensive schemes are to sell out against the run on early downs. That's my one challenge to our head coach. Do you think that's a viable complaint or not?
Well, I would say this. I'd have to go back and chart the Florida game, and I didn't look at first down runs versus pass plays. And if you did, then more credit to you, because I certainly did not look at that. I will tell you this. In the first drive of the game was a lot more runs. I think it was 7 runs to like 4 passes, and I don't know if that was how many of those were on first down. But the play before the Tariq Black touchdown was a first down run. And it was a first down run that picked up about 12 yards to Chris Evans, and then the next play was a play-action pass. And so I think, in talking to Tim Drevno this past week, I really truly think that what they're trying to get accomplished is they're trying to establish that offense identity early on, run, so that the play action works. Where I agree with you is that I think in some of these games it's going to help to establish a little more of a passing threat in the first quarter. But I would have to say like a trend over the course of the season. Last year against Iowa, I thought that they threw the ball pretty considerably in that first quarter, off a first down and off a second down. There was just a lot of plays that were missed. Against Ohio State, it's tough to say because Wilton Speight was banged up and couldn't throw the ball. But, that's a certainly interesting one. And I think, Steve, this is a challenge to you since you brought it up. But go ahead and track it the whole season. And when we talk again in like week 6 or week 7 for your podcast, you tell me what the numbers say.
All right, challenge accepted. Final thing, Michael. Gross overreaction time. The reason I was sweating out this game, because one, young guys, and yeah, a lot of these guys have experience. You've done all the legwork on that and how much of these guys have played. But as a unit, on both sides, they haven't played together a lot. There were going to be mistakes. I just wanted us to get past this game because the next 5 or 6 weeks, I think we're double-digit favorites in all those games. Not saying we'll win all those games by double digits, but that gives you the opportunity as you're rising up the rankings. Like this weekend, for example, we're only 8th, but a bunch of teams around us and above us are playing each other. So we're going to move up in the rankings after beating Cincinnati. And so this was the point in the season to position ourselves for that tough stretch drive at the end with Penn State on the road. Maryland on the road before Wisconsin and then Ohio State. If we could just get by Florida, though, you like developing your team while you're rising in the rankings. We were able to do that. Are you more or less optimistic based on what you saw on Saturday, or did it really confirm what you already thought?
Well, I'll tell you this. My preseason prediction was 11-1 with a single loss on the road to Wisconsin. And when I put that out there, I kind of put it out there more so in a best hope scenario for Michigan. After watching that game against Florida, I am more convinced that Michigan can go 10-2, 11-1, even 12-0 this season, because I think the defense is so legit that even when you get into some of these games against better offenses, Penn State, Indiana, maybe Maryland later in the season, Wisconsin, a tough game on the road, Ohio State, that defense is going to give Michigan a chance to be in every single game, and I really like that. And so I'm still sticking with my 11-1 preseason prediction. I think Michigan, probably goes into State College and gives Penn State a really strong run for its money. I think they can beat them because I like the Jim Harbaugh versus James Franklin matchup. I just think it's such a superior coaching advantage. At the same time, Michigan is what on the road? They lost at Utah, they lost at Iowa, they lost at Ohio State. They've got to prove that they can win one of these big games on the road, and that's where it kind of comes back to Wilton Speight, and he's got to be a difference maker for the Wolverines instead of just a guy that shows up and plays.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was this our first non-conference win away from home against a ranked team since Notre Dame in 2006? Have we done it since then?
Well, it certainly didn't happen against Alabama.
Yeah. I think it's been since we mauled number 2 Notre Dame back in 2006. I couldn't think of another one.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It wasn't against Appalachian State in 2014, obviously. So, no, I think that's probably the truth. And so they've got a lot to prove on the road, but I really like this team after what I saw. And I agree with you that you look at Cincinnati this week, Air Force, then you play Purdue, who showed up against Louisville, but it's going to be a tougher game against Michigan's defense, and Louisville doesn't really play defense. Then you've got Michigan State after the bye. You've got Indiana on the road. I mean, you should be 6-0, and you should be 6-0 with a relative ease, developing all these young guys as you go up to play State College. And the thing that I like about that State College game is at this point is they're going to play now. They're going to play Purdue, and they're going to play Indiana. And while they're not terribly tough places to play, they are going to be 2 road games before they play that big one at Penn State. I think they should have a lot of road confidence if they win those 2 games like we expect them to do. This season sets up really well for Michigan. It really does. The hardest stretch, I got to say, that hard stretch, though, is now you look at Maryland, at Wisconsin, and then home against Ohio State, and suddenly you're going like, whoa, that could be really difficult for Michigan to get up for 3 straight games like that.
Yeah, I remind you of 97 where they paid, there was a game with Minnesota in there, but the close was at Penn State, at Wisconsin, and Ohio State at home was 3 of the last 4 games. Kind of remind you of that a little bit. Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor. His show is a must-listen if you're a Michigan junkie. You can also read him over at Michigan Insider. Great stuff, Michael. Thanks for being with us, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime, Steve.
All right, when we come back, my first weekly Big Ten Power Ratings. Also, if I had a vote in the AP poll, here's how I'd rank them next. right, back here on Michigan Podcast. So with week 1 now fully in the books, let's take a look at how I would stack up the teams in the Big Ten from the bottom to the top. I'm going to give a little love to Illinois, Rutgers, and Purdue in week 1 because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it all that often the rest of the way. Okay, so let's start with number 14. I love me some PJ Fleck, but that opener against brutal Buffalo was blah. Okay, I mean, Buffalo was 2-10 last year, man. You know, and Rodney Smith, 23 carries for 76 yards. I mean, that's as inspirational a figure as PJ Fleck is non-inspirational as that opening game was. So Minnesota is at the rear. Illinois found a way to come back and beat Ball State for what's going to be a rare win for them this fall. I've got Rutgers at number 12. They held top 10 Washington to less than 100 yards rushing in a scrappy effort. So that's something for Rutgers. And I thought they'd look more competent with Jerry Kill as the offensive coordinator, and they did. At number 11, I've got Purdue. They found a pesky way to hang around. Now, I know people are making, hey, it was close. Guys, they gave up 600 yards of offense. I mean, they got dominated in the game. I mean, Louisville was inventing ways to shoot itself in the foot. I mean, Bobby Petrino's got to find another mistress after that matchup. I mean, that was a brutal opener for Louisville. If they were playing a more equal opponent, they would have lost that game. So Louisville went up and down the field against Purdue in that game, just kept shooting themselves in the foot, but I'll give Purdue some love for finding a way to be pesky and to hang around. Indiana, I have at 10th. They found a potent passing game, but that running game and defense going to need some work. And now Nick Westbrook, last year's leading receiver, he's gone for the year, which means Simi Cobb he better learn what double team means because he's going to see that a lot the rest of the way. Nebraska, I've got at number 9. They got a scare against underrated Arkansas State, one of the better teams in the Sun Belt, but they also got the win. Offensively, they look like what a Mike Riley team's supposed to look like, but Bobby Diaco and that defense in week 1. Yeah, you might have been raising a black flag more than wearing the black shirts. Better play better defense than that next week in Autzen Stadium. By the way, early line on that game has Oregon, which was 5-7 last year. Vegas has Oregon a 14-point favorite over Nebraska in that game. That's a yo. All right, next in our Big Ten Power Ratings, I've got Northwestern number 8. Their typical nondescript early season effort for a Pat Fitzgerald coach team. If you got my point spread picks on Patreon last week, one of the trends we gave you is over the last 5 years, the under in Northwestern non-conference games, it's now 18-4. That's a 75% trend. So that's just what Northwestern does. They don't blow teams away in the non-conference season, and they get better as the season goes on. All right, the next tier of teams. At number 7, I've got Sparty. The box score looked the way it did with D'Antonio's good Sparty teams. They had 200 yards rushing, 200 yards passing. Brian Lewerke played very well. It was still shaky at times. That opening drive, they go down the field, LJ Scott fumbles at the goal line. You know, if you're a Sparty fan, you're like, oh man, I watched this all last year, right? But the way they came back, I don't know how good Bowling Green is, but they did win their final 3 games last year and came into the season with some momentum. So that was probably the best case opening scenario for Sparty given last season's implosion. 6th in my Big Ten rankings, I've got Iowa. They spoiled a lot of folks' upset specials, which wasn't one of mine. Remember, I had Iowa minus the 11.5 against Wyoming on our Patreon picks last week. They had a dominant defensive performance, but I know a lot of people are jumping on Josh Allen. Oh, he's not that good. I mean, and let's face it, most of you doing so didn't watch a single damn Wyoming game last year, so let's keep it real, yo. Here's what happened. Wyoming had to start 2 true freshmen in the offensive line. They had maybe the best running back in the Mountain West Conference last year in Brian Hill. He's gone to the NFL. They also lost their 2 top receivers. I mean, Josh Allen's going in there with one arm behind his back against what is perennially one of the best to better defenses in the Big Ten. And didn't we see that? I think we saw enough of the Iowa defense last year in Iowa City when a safety beat us. Okay, so give Josh Allen a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He was totally hamstrung given what he had to go into that situation with an offense that's largely rebuilding. Number 5, I have Wisconsin, dominated as expected after a slow start against an underwhelming Utah State team. I'm going to put Maryland at number 4. They 50-burgered Texas. Even bad Texas teams, and we've seen some bad Texas teams the last few years, don't get 50-burgered in Austin all too often. And they did it with not 1, but 2 freshman quarterbacks. Now, the redshirt freshman, who was electric the entire game until he got hurt, we learned today he is done for the season. So Kasim Hill, big-time recruit for DJ Durkin, the true freshman, he takes over now for the Terps. My top 3 in the Big Ten this week for Week 1, Penn State, they now have the nation's longest streak of scoring at least 35 points in a game. I know Akron may not be that good, but I thought that might have been the most dominant performance Penn State has had as a program since the scandal. Number 2, I've got Michigan. We mentioned that one stat to rule them all. Michigan, the 5th team since 2005 to hold Florida to fewer than 10 first downs. The previous 4 all made it to the national championship game. And number 1, I'm going to keep Ohio State there. They found some new offensive weapons in the second half demolition of Indiana. Stopped getting cute, ran some crossing routes to get guys isolated one-on-one in space. Those turned into big plays. Stopped leaving their corners on an island, played a little bit more zone, gave that front 4 they have, which is terrific, more of a chance to get to Richard Legow, and it worked. So Ohio State, with its performance in Week 1, is number 1 this week in my Big Ten power ratings. And now if I had a vote in the AP Top 25, and this is a mixture of both how I think the teams are right now, as well as where I thought they were at the start of the year, here's how I would rank them. Number 25, West Virginia. Had its chances against Virginia Tech. Will Grier, though, looks like the real deal at quarterback. UCLA with that comeback for the ages at number 24. It was a great comeback. I don't want to take anything away from them. And whenever somebody says that and then they go, but, they're about to take something away. But let's not forget, they were Bruining hard the first 3 quarters of that game. Still, incredible comeback, no doubt about it. Although you got to wonder, why is A&M throwing the ball 17 times to the backup quarterback in a 30-point lead? And if you know the answer to that, then you're probably a better coach than Kevin Sumlin. Number 23, Kansas State. Number 22, Notre Dame had 300-yard rushers in a game for the first time in over 50 years. Georgia Tech. Yeah, I've got him in my poll at number 21. They belonged on that field with Tennessee. And, they put up over 500 yards rushing against an SEC foe. And by the way, that the mighty SEC, Georgia Tech last year was 3-0 against the SEC, and they lost to them by 1 point in double overtime last night. So, yeah, I think Georgia Tech belongs. Number 20 in my poll, as we look at the next 5 teams, if I had a vote in the top 25, I've got Colorado with a sneaky good win in a neutral site against Colorado State, and a big revenge spot for the Rams. And plus, the Rams had the advantage with the week to play. Didn't matter. Colorado wins that game. That was one of the games I actually got wrong in my Patreon picks this week. South Carolina with a huge win against an NC State team. A lot of people, myself included, were pumping up in the offseason. The team to watch. Jake Bentley, though, was a man against that Wolfpack defense. Stanford at number 18, very impressive against Rice. But it's Rice. We'll find out a little bit more when they play USC this week. Tennessee coming off the big win that probably saved Butch Jones' job for now against Georgia Tech. And Wisconsin at number 16. As we look at the next 5 teams, if I had a vote in the AP poll, Oklahoma at 15. Here's my problem. They didn't have a running back averaged more than 4 yards a carry against UTEP, man. Okay? They lost their best DB, Jordan Parker, done for the year. You're just not going to throw the ball like that all over the yard against Ohio State's front 4. You're just not. They got to have a running game there. Number 14, if I had a vote this week in the AP poll, I've got Maryland. Give them some love after that huge win in Austin. Washington at 13, USC at 12, Florida State I dropped to 11. Not because I didn't think they physically didn't belong against Alabama. They showed that they did. But I think the DeAndre Francois injury for the year is a huge loss for Florida State. Now into the top 10, I've got Clemson at number 10. We'll learn more about them against number 9, Auburn, this week. The Battle of the Tigers. That's going to be a fun one in Death Valley. Georgia at number 8. Who needs Jacob Eason? Jake Fromm came in there, the prized freshman, and lit it up against Appalachian State. He gets a chance to prove himself now on the road in South Bend on Saturday night. Virginia Tech at number 7. Fred Jackson's kid, our former running backs coach, offensive coordinator, Josh Jackson, makes his debut as a redshirt freshman, has 100 yards rushing and 200 yards passing in his first game. Is that good? I think that's a good way to start your collegiate career. So props to the Hokies. They still play defense there as well. Oklahoma State was just a machine against a Tulsa team that was pretty good last year and has a lot of those guys back. And now we go to the top 5. I've got LSU at number 5. BYU did not get across midfield, guys. They didn't get across midfield. Oh, and Matt Canada, the new offensive coordinator. Danny Etling, 14 for 17. Throwing the football. Maybe that turned out to be a good hire for LSU, worth the money. So based off that dominant performance, I've got them number 5 this week. Penn State, I have number 4. Michigan, I have number 3 because of the dominance we've already talked about already in the show. And I've got Alabama and Ohio State, 1 versus 2. Now, if you want to tell me Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, you want to switch that order around a little bit, I'm okay with that. But to me, those are, coming out of week 1, clearly the 4 most impressive teams. Still want to see more from Clemson with the new quarterback against a top opponent. Same for Auburn, a team I was very high on in the offseason as well. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast. And we asked you on our Twitter page, and you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast, what was your favorite stat in Michigan's dominance of Florida? 14% of you said that you loved the 2 50-plus yard field goals. That's the school record Quinn Nordine set in his very first game. 33% of you said you loved the 6 sacks. 53% of you said allowing only 9 first downs. And as I pointed out earlier, again, I want to reiterate this stat. I said this earlier on this week's episode to Michael Spath. 5 teams. Michigan is now the 5th team since 2005 to hold Florida to less than 10 first downs in a game. The previous 4 who did it all made it to the national championship game. And that brings us to this week's question of the week. Adam Kazel asks, how long until Florida has their fill of McElwain? Let's keep in mind, this guy took over a program that was in a mess. Will Muschamp had 1 good year, left the offense in a crater, and he's won the SEC East 2 years in a row. All right, he's the first coach in SEC history to win a division title his first 2 years at a school. So while Saturday was not a good display, you also wonder with all those suspensions where this program's leadership and chemistry was at. What were those guys doing all offseason when they were throwing chum in the water for the Wolverines to motivate them? Yeah, clearly they weren't getting together on the same page themselves and motivating themselves. So while this was as bad a dreadful of a start to this season as Florida fans could have hoped for, this guy's performance his first 2 years is also probably better than they could have hoped for. But at some point, he's got to find himself a quarterback and develop that guy. And if I were a Florida fan, that's the thing I'd be the most disturbed by, is they just didn't seem to have a plan at quarterback, confidence in Felipe Franks. If I were the Gators, I'd just say squash that game. Our season starts all over again on Saturday. We're going to our original plan. Felipe Franks is our quarterback. We'll throw in some red zone packages for Malik Zaire and just start to develop that guy. But hey, aren't you glad we're not them? I am. We used to have problems like that. We don't anymore. All right, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget, support us via Patreon. Get exclusive access to my weekly picks as well as our instant reaction audio podcast that we record after every Michigan game this year. Want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping us to get the word out about what we're doing here. You can also subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, right here on YouTube as well. Follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. We'll see you again next week. Go Blue.
We play as a team, and the old season is over. You and I know. It's going to be Michigan again.